The case before the court involves whether Obamacare subsidies offered to millions of Americans are legal. If not, 6 million people could lose their tax credits to buy health insurance.
If the court were to rule that the administration's interpretation was wrong, then there are 34 states where people would no longer be able to get these tax credits for buying coverage on the exchange.
That means the cost of health insurance could rise again. Depending on your state, monthly premiums could jump by hundreds of dollars. Heritage Foundation Chief Economist Stephen Moore says, if the court strikes down the subsidy, Republicans need to prove to voters they can provide better quality of care with more choices and to more Americans in a way that doesn't bankrupt the country. Given the fiasco of Obamacare, Moore says, that shouldn't be hard.
Well, Stephen Moore is chief economist for the Heritage Foundation. He's a CBN News contributor, and we're delighted to have him back. Stephen, you have pointed out in some very cogent editorials or op-ed pieces that the president is not telling the truth about Obamacare. And I want to ask you this question. Do you think the commander-in-chief really understands what that law is all about?
I think he had an ideological agenda, and he believes what he wants to believe, and oftentimes that's in conflict with the facts. And, you know, when he said he wanted to fundamentally transform America, this socialization of our healthcare system was a fundamental part of that.
Well, you point out, it's like he's living in a parallel universe, though. The facts are different from what he says. He goes out and he makes this thing. Well, your health care costs are not going up.
Right.
You know, I mean,
well, let me give you just one example.
Please don't
Pat.
give me several.
Okay, so remember, this was one of his favorite sound bites during the original presidential campaign. If you, under my plan, the average family, remember, will save $2,500. Well, American families are not saving $2,500. Most families are paying, seeing increases in their premiums. By the way, it's going to get a lot worse in the months ahead. A lot of the insurance companies are now saying across the states, 10, 20, in some cases 30 to 50% increases in their premiums. And by the way, Pat, as you know, we talked about this last time I was in your show. Middle class is very financially strained right now. They don't have an extra $200 or $300 a month for health insurance costs. So this is something that hasn't worked with that respect. And let me get to that statistic the president's going to use all the time, that 6 or 7 million people are going to lose their health insurance if the Supreme Court comes down the right way on this and invalidates. That's true, but you know what? For every person who's been a beneficiary of Obamacare, there have been 3 to 4 people who have actually paying much higher costs. Many of them lost the insurance that they had. Remember, the president said if you like the health insurance you have, you'll be able to keep it. Millions of people lost their health insurance. So the real challenge ahead, I think, as a Republican, is are the Republicans ready, if they win this case, to come up with something bold that's popular with the public and that trumps Obamacare? And I hope they are, because it's going to be a critical 3 or 4 months.
Well, this Gruber apparently was the architect of this bill, and yet the president denied him. Oh, he's some guy that was wandering around the White House. We're not even sure who he was. He was there constantly as their chief advisor. How can he lie about things like that?
I think if you're on an ideological crusade, truth oftentimes becomes the first casualty. We know that throughout history. And I think that the problem with the left today, this is a broader point, they think they're righteous. And because they think they're righteous, they can lie, cheat, steal, do whatever it takes. And by the way, this is the way, a lot of these battles have ensued throughout history. But you know what? You can't fool the American people. That's the bottom line here. I mean, it doesn't matter what they say. The American people are looking at what's happened with Obamacare, and it is still incredibly unpopular with the American people. 60% of the American people don't like this plan.
You mentioned in one of your op-eds that a large number of people have been added to the Medicare rolls, and the president is trumpeting this as an achievement. And you said Clinton did it just the opposite. Tell us about that.
I mean, this is important, actually, that, under Bill Clinton, when we did welfare reform back then, I was working with Newt Gingrich, and I believe that welfare reform we did in the mid-1990s was one of the great social policy achievements of the last 50 years. I mean, Pat, we moved millions of people off of welfare into work, leading productive lives. And by the way, once you get a job, you move up the economic ladder. That's the way the American system works. So it was a triumph in every way. By the way, welfare caseloads fell by 50% after we did work for welfare requirements. It was a huge triumph. Obama has done exactly the opposite. He views people being on welfare as a stimulus to the economy. Now, I can't even, as an economist, I can't even explain that to you. How is putting more people on food stamps and unemployment insurance benefits and disability benefits a stimulus to the economy? And if that were the case, we should all go on food stamps, right? Everybody should have food stamps. We'll be a rich country.
Leave your job.
It's absurd. It's absurd. But that's what that's the kind of mentality we're dealing with from with the left. And look, I believe if we really want to help people at the bottom, and I think that should be one of our highest callings, is how do we help the bottom 20%? Most of the people in the bottom 20% don't have anyone working in the household. And if no one is working, how can they get on that ladder? How can they climb? We need to have policies that encourage work and encourage marriage. You know, this is an important point. It's so apropos to everything that you speak about. If you look at families in the highest income quintile, they are 3 times more likely to be married than people on the bottom. Now, isn't that interesting? What that tells me as an economist is that marriage is an economic stimulus.
Not being on welfare. All right, one last question. The Supreme Court now is going to, any day, they've already voted on it, they just haven't released the findings. The question that they said is that according to the bill, you couldn't give subsidies unless there was state.
Right, that's right.
Will you tell us about that?
Well, this is complicated. I'm not an expert. I'm not a Supreme Court expert. But I will say this, Pat. If we win this case, it is so important for we as conservatives, and that oftentimes that's Republicans, not always, to say, look, there's a better way of doing this. We can provide, I believe, with a free market model, insurance for everybody in this country, every American, at a cheaper cost. It provides them better quality health care. And by the way, Pat, gives them choices. You know, one of the biggest problems with Obamacare is you and I have to buy the same insurance policy. We have to buy the same insurance policy as a 22-year-old, my 22-year-old son. Well, everybody has different preferences. You may want, you know, different levels of care. You might want a higher, higher deductible and so on, and lower, and you can't do that under Obamacare. So I have 2 sons that are, you know, just out of college. They have to pay astronomical costs for health care because of Obamacare. They could, without Obamacare, they could go out and buy a very affordable plan. The young people listening to the show, young people are the biggest victims of Obamacare because it shot up the cost of their insurance.
They've got to carry the sick older people. Is that the idea?
Exactly.
The young people, the healthy young, have got to subsidize the sick.
That's sort of exactly what's happening. And if you give people more choices and you make the patient, put the patient back in the equation, I think you can lower costs of the whole system and provide people with the highest quality of care. Medicaid, Pat, Medicaid is the worst insurance system in the Western world. Why do we want to put more people on Medicaid? It's terrible. A lot of the best hospitals, Mayo Clinic, they don't take Medicaid. So we're not doing a big favor to people putting them on Medicaid. You can't get good treatment with Medicaid.
Do you want to prognosticate on the court?
I was afraid you were going to ask me. Do you want what my heart says or my mind says? Look, I'm so hopeful we win this case because Obamacare, in my opinion, I've been in politics for 30 years, single worst law that's ever passed.
Disaster.
That's saying a lot, by the way.
What it was, and the proponent of it said we've got to pass it to find out what's in it.
And they still don't know what's in it.
They don't know. None of us know what's in it. And they don't. And here Gruber says, here's what I intended. It was a hooker. I put it in there to catch people and
to confuse people.
And confuse people.
Right. The good news is, Pat, there is a major movement around the country. Every day that goes by, Obamacare becomes less popular.
Well, all we can do is hope. Well, Stephen, thank you for being with us. God bless you. And we'll see what happens, ladies and gentlemen. But any day now can come out, and the Republicans certainly need to have something in the wings. I think they do. They talk about it, but I'm not sure it's been fleshed out yet. But you can see Steve Moore's columns on economic issues on our website, and he also writes frequently in the Wall Street Journal.